The 406mm naval gun was never supposed to behave like this. It was a weapon built for overwhelming destruction. For pounding enemy fleets and coastal defenses from extreme distances. Not for careful, deliberate precision. Each shell weighed more than a small car. And once fired, there was no fine adjustment. No quick correction, no second chance in the way a marksman might have with a rifle. Naval doctrine treated these guns as instruments of area devastation. Brutal, loud, and terrifying, but blunt. And yet, in this moment, one commander looked at this colossal machine and saw something different. He didn't see a gun. He saw a problem to be solved. At sea, nothing stays still. The target isn't just moving forward. It's pitching, rolling, changing speed, subtly altering course. The firing ship itself is doing the same, rising and falling with the swell. Add wind, air density, temperature, and the curvature of the earth. And suddenly the idea of precision with a 406mm gun sounds almost absurd. These weren't theoretical complications either. They were the very reasons naval engagements often devolved into prolonged exchanges of thunderous fire. Ships lobbing shells toward estimated positions and hoping volume would do what accuracy could not. But this commander refused to rely on hope. He understood that raw firepower was meaningless without timing. Every second mattered. He studied the rhythm of the sea. The cadence of the enemy's movement, the subtle patterns that most would dismiss as noise. Rangefinders fed him numbers, but numbers alone weren't enough. Experience filled the gaps. Years of drills, failed exercises, near misses, and long nights spent replaying scenarios in his head. This wasn't just calculation. It was intuition sharpened by discipline. To everyone else on the bridge, the enemy battleship was simply out there. Somewhere beyond the horizon, partially obscured by haze and distance. To him, it was a moving equation. Speed multiplied by time. Bearing adjusted by drift. Elevation corrected for wind that couldn't be felt on deck but would claw at the shell during its long arc through the sky. He wasn't guessing. He was predicting. The scale of the weapon made the challenge even more unforgiving. A sniper can adjust after a miss. A battleship cannot. Reloading a 406mm gun took time, coordination, and mechanical effort. Each shell fired announced its presence with a thunderclap that echoed across the sea, giving the enemy warning and precious seconds to react. Firing too early or too late wouldn't just waste ammunition. It could reveal intent, alert the target, and collapse the narrow window of opportunity entirely. So he waited. That waiting was the most difficult part. The pressure on the bridge was immense. Every officer knew what was at stake. And every instinct screamed to fire, to act, to unleash the sheer might of the ship. Doing nothing feels wrong in battle. Silence can feel like weakness. But restraint, in this case, was strength. He trusted the process, trusted his understanding of the situation more than the urge to act. When he finally gave the order, it wasn't dramatic. No speech. No raised voice. Just calm certainty. The gun crews moved with practiced precision. Unaware that this shot was different from all the others they had trained for. To them, it was another firing sequence. To the commander, it was the culmination of everything he had measured, anticipated, and believed. The massive gun elevated to its calculated angle. The ship subtly compensating for its own motion, the timing aligned to a fraction of a second. In that moment, the 406mm gun stopped being a symbol of brute force and became something almost delicate in its intent. The shell's journey began slowly. Then violently, as thousands of tons of pressure hurled it into the air. It climbed, arcing far beyond what the human eye could track, spending long seconds in flight. An eternity in combat. During that time, the enemy ship continued to move. Unaware that its future had already been calculated. Its path intersected by a projectile launched minutes earlier based on where it would be. Not where it was. That's what made this act so extraordinary. It wasn't about the size of the gun or the power of the explosion that would follow. It was about foresight. About understanding that precision, even with the largest weapons ever mounted on a warship, was still possible if someone was willing to think differently. This commander had taken a tool of mass destruction and applied the mindset of a marksman. Patient, analytical, and disciplined. Naval warfare had always been loud, chaotic, and seemingly imprecise. But in this moment, it became something else entirely. The ocean, the wind, the distance. All of it was accounted for, bent to human intention through calculation and calm under pressure. It was proof that even in an era dominated by steel and fire, Battles could still hinge on a single mind making the right decision at the right time. And as the shell disappeared into the distance, there was no celebration, no immediate confirmation. Just quiet tension. Because when you fire a weapon like this with sniper-like intent, the outcome isn't instant. It arrives later, carried back across the sea by shockwaves, smoke, and the sudden realization, on both sides, that something impossible has just been set in motion. For several long seconds after the shell vanished into the sky, nothing seemed to change. The sea rolled on as it always had, indifferent and calm on the surface, while every man on the bridge waited in silence. No one spoke. No one needed to. When a 406mm shell is in flight, there's no pulling it back, no adjusting its course. It exists somewhere beyond sight, climbing, slowing, and then beginning its long descent. Guided only by the math that launched it and the future it was aimed toward. On the enemy battleship, there was no warning. No alarm sounded to announce what was coming. The crew went about their duties, unaware that a projectile weighing more than a car was already falling toward them. Its trajectory calculated minutes earlier with unnerving confidence. The ship cut through the water steadily, its engines humming, its armor trusted to withstand anything the enemy could throw at it. After all, battleships were built to survive punishment. That belief had saved countless crews before. Then the sky itself seemed to tear open. The impact wasn't just loud. It was overwhelming. The shell struck with such force that it felt less like a hit and more like the sudden arrival of a natural disaster. Steel plates designed to resist repeated bombardment buckled in an instant. Armor that had taken months to forge and install failed in a fraction of a second. The shell didn't explode on contact in the way many would imagine. It drove inward first, carrying unimaginable kinetic energy deep into the ship before detonating where it could do the most damage. What followed was chaos compressed into moments. Compartments ruptured. Fires erupted where there had been routine calm seconds earlier. Shockwaves traveled through the hull, knocking sailors off their feet and ripping equipment from its mountings. The ship shuddered, not like it had been grazed, but like it had been wounded at its core. This wasn't a lucky hit to the superstructure or a glancing blow along the side. It was precise, devastating, and perfectly placed. Back on the firing ship, confirmation didn't come as a cheer or a shout. It came through optics, through instruments, through the subtle but unmistakable change in the enemy's movement. The battleship began to slow. Smoke rose where none should have been. Its course wavered, no longer clean or confident. That was when the realization set in. The impossible shot had landed exactly where it needed to. This is the moment where the story shifts from probability to inevitability. A battleship can absorb damage, but only if that damage is spread out. Precision collapses that advantage. One well-placed hit can sever power, cripple steering, or ignite magazines deep within the armored heart of the vessel. And that's what this shot achieved. The enemy ship was still afloat, still visible, but it was no longer fully alive. Systems failed in sequence. Damage control teams rushed into smoke-filled corridors, fighting fires and flooding with desperate urgency, knowing that time was no longer on their side. For the crew, confusion turned into grim understanding. They hadn't been caught in a broad exchange of fire. They had been singled out, reached across miles of ocean by a weapon that wasn't supposed to be this accurate. That realization carried its own psychological weight. Confidence in armor, in design, in doctrine. All of it cracked alongside the steel. On the firing ship, the commander didn't celebrate. He watched. That single shot had never been about spectacle. It was about effect. He knew what followed now would be less about gunnery and more about consequences. A wounded battleship becomes a liability. Slower, easier to track, less able to respond. The balance of the engagement had shifted. Not through volume of fire, but through one calculated decision. As minutes passed, the damage worsened. Fires spread into adjacent compartments. Flooding increased as bulkheads strained under pressure they were never meant to endure. Attempts to correct course became sluggish, then ineffective. The ship's profile in the water changed, subtle at first, then undeniable. This was no longer a question of if it could recover, but how long it could delay the inevitable. And all of this traced back to that single moment of silence on the bridge. The waiting, the restraint, the choice to treat a massive naval gun like a precision instrument. The shell hadn't just struck metal. It struck assumptions. It proved that even the largest, most heavily armored warships were vulnerable to intelligence, patience, and timing. Eventually, the sea began to reclaim what the shell had started. The battleship listed further, smoke marking its position like a grim signal flare. For the men watching from afar, there was a strange stillness to it. No dramatic explosion visible from miles away, no instant disappearance beneath the waves. Just the slow, undeniable unraveling of a machine that moments earlier had seemed unstoppable. This was the true power of that shot. Not just that it sank a battleship, but that it did so by rewriting the rules everyone thought they understood. It wasn't brute force meeting brute force. It was foresight meeting inevitability. A reminder that in war, as in life, the outcome is often decided long before the final moment. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes in patience. And sometimes with a single, perfectly placed decision that changes everything.